Hello and welcome to Bags of Action. My name's Steve and this is a 5-minute review of Venom from 2018. The film is directed by Ruben Fleischer. He's probably best known for working on films like Zombieland, Gangster Squad. He did Zombieland Double Tap in 2019 and he directed this film. The film stars Tom Hardy, Michelle Williams, Riz Ahmed and Scott Haze. Tom Hardy plays Eddie Brock. He's an investigative reporter who is very good at his job, getting to the truth. He rides around the city on his motorbike. He's a bit of a rebel, and yet he does work for this larger corporation. At the same time, we find out that Riz Ahmed plays Carlton Drake. He's this sort of very rich businessman who's investigating something in space. He's really into science and pushing the limits without thinking too much about the consequences. In this case, he sent something into space and it is retrieved 4 different samples that crash land back on Earth. Unfortunately, one of them escapes the breach and they manage to retrieve the other 3. We then see through a series of different scenes this goo essentially comes out and bonds with a stranger who is near the crash site, and it almost uses that person up and then jumps to someone else, sort of body hopping as it were, and driving them to somewhere for its own purposes. We see it move from person to person. The other 3 samples are retrieved and taken to America, back to the lab, where Drake is then doing tests on them, trying to work out where they come from, what they do, how he can bond them with something. He begins with animal trials, and once that's done, he then moves on to human trials, which, as I mentioned, he doesn't really care too much about the rules or science. He claims he's doing it for the benefit of humanity, to help them cure diseases and that sort of stuff, but you don't buy it because he's very much about power, despite his very good PR and his appearance of having children in the labs and showing them off and all this kind of stuff. Brock, as this reporter, inevitably comes into conflict with him. He finds out that something's going on. He doesn't trust this guy, and he blows up his whole life. Causes problems for his boss, which then results in him getting fired from his job. He then gets his girlfriend fired too because he leaked some information that she was privy to, and she immediately gives him back his engagement ring and walks off. The film then jumps forward a year. Tom, as Eddie Brock, is down on his luck. He's a bit of a loser. He lives in a small apartment. He's trying to find work, and he's barely scraping by. He comes into contact with the Venom symbiont, and chaos ensues. As you might expect, the film goes in a bit of a predictable direction at this point, and it seems to drift very much into CGI territory. This is a film that's from Sony, but also has bonds with the Marvel Universe, because of course the character is from the Marvel comics, but this is one of the properties that they sold off to Sony in the early days, and they're still able to work on that one, like Spider-Man and so on, which is where this Venom character comes from. Tom Hardy does quite good in the role. He doesn't chew the scenery in the same way that he normally does. He's a lot more toned down than you might expect. Michelle Williams is quite good in a supporting role as his girlfriend and then later friend in the film. She brings a bit of empathy to the film and sympathy for Tom Hardy's character, because what he's going through isn't something that he really wants at first. He's more of a victim of the symbiont and its desires than anything else. There's a lot of action in this film, lots of explosions, car chases, some great CGI with the symbiont fighting people and attacking them. You can get to see some of what it can really do. And if you've seen the previous Spider-Man films where you had Tobey Maguire as the black-suited Spider-Man, then you're familiar with a little bit of what Venom can do again. But this is a different twist. It's closer to the source material, but only up to a point. Without spoiling the film, things escalate, things get really worse. You find out that the 3 other symbionts are still around and they bond with one other person, and you then get into what I really didn't enjoy about the film, which is the CGI fights, where you've got 2 people with a symbiont each, but they then get enveloped by the goo, and you have these 8-foot-tall monsters that then punch each other, fly off buildings, go through windows, and it just becomes a bit of a cartoon. It just devolves into Tom and Jerry with these 2 things that I don't really care about. I can't see the people. I don't actually give a monkeys about what happens to them. And it just got a bit boring. I suspect if you're a much younger viewer, you'd find it really exciting with these two things punching each other and stabbing each other, but it just went on for far too long. It was a bit repetitive, and I didn't care who won or lost. I think the film loses itself when it drifts into this space. Before, it was a story about a person, and you did care about Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock. There was some emotion. He had connections to people in his community, the fact that he knows the name of the person in the local shop, she's trying to help him, there's this homeless woman that he speaks to, and he has an emotional bond with her, so there is some heart to it to begin with, but the latter half is very much punchy, stabby, CGI, crashy fest, and that's where I think it really lost some of the interest for me. Marvel are continually trying to do something new with their films, or they were in the early days of the Marvel Universe, where every film had a very different tone and a very different feel. You had a Cold War kind of drama with The Winter Soldier. You had Ant-Man, which was a comedy but was very much a family drama and a small film. You had Guardians of the Galaxy and so on. I think if Sony had been smart, rather than just doing another smashy, punchy film, they could have looked at some of the other iterations of Venom and done something unique with them. There is one where a character called Flash Thompson, who's from the Spider-Man comics, was the school bully, but he went to war as a soldier and ended up coming back injured, and I think he lost both his legs. And in a later Marvel comic, what they did was Flash Thompson gets the symbiont and becomes a soldier of fortune. He's able to control it, but it also gives him his legs, super strength. He can use the symbiont when it gets out of control. And he's only able to wear it, I think, for 24 hours, and then he has to take it off again. So there's this running clock. There's the pressure of that, how long he can control it before he puts it back in the tank. It gives him abilities, but of course, if he loses control, it turns into this monster thing again, and then goes out and kills people, and he can barely hold on. He becomes the passenger. So you could have had a great kind of war film, or something dark and dirty like Sicario that's almost edging onto horror with this Venom symbiont. But they went for something fairly simple. And they set it up that they could do a sequel, and there's even a mid-credit sequence to introduce yet another symbiont, so you're going to get more of the same kind of stuff. The problem with that is, I think it'll run out of steam. You might get a sequel, you might even get a third film, but after that, who knows? They're not really thinking long-term or doing something particularly different. Especially as box office-wise, this film did fairly well, but is currently on Netflix. So, for all of those reasons, I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was particularly brilliant. I'm going to give Venom 3 bags of action out of 5. And I think that's me being generous, possibly just for some of the nostalgia for the more interesting comics. So, have you seen Venom? If so, get in touch with us and let us know. You can contact us in all the usual ways. You can follow us on Twitter. You can join the Facebook group. Don't forget to support us by subscribing to this channel, leaving a comment. We're also on Ko-fi as well, so if you want to leave us a tip there, you can. We have new episodes coming out every week, and we'll see you next time.